4 years, 3 months, and 11 days. I know that number because I wrote it down, not out of some obsessive need to track the wound. I'm not that kind of man. I wrote it in the back of a pocket notebook I've carried since my millwright days at the plant, the kind where I used to log torque specs and weld measurements. Now it mostly holds grocery lists and the odd phone number I don't want to lose. But I wrote that date down the morning after my son told me he was done with me, so I'd have something solid to hold on to when my memory started softening the edges, the way memory always does when the truth is something you'd rather not look at straight. 4 years, 3 months, and 11 days. No call on my 62nd birthday. No text when I had my hip replaced last October. And I know he knew because his mother told me she'd told him, which is its own particular kind of hurt. Knowing the information got there and still nothing came back. Nothing when I sold the house in Westerville that he grew up in, the house where I'd spent every weekend for 20 years. Fixing something, painting something, keeping the gutters clear, and the furnace running and the sump pump working, because that's what you do when you are a father. And those two things feel like the same word. He didn't reach out. I stopped expecting him to. And I made my peace with it the way you make peace with a bad knee. You don't stop feeling it, you learn to walk around it, and some mornings you barely notice it, and some mornings it's the first thing you feel when you put weight on it, and the only thing that works is to just keep moving. Then on a Tuesday night in March, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I was rinsing a coffee mug. The kind of ordinary moment that doesn't know it's about to become something else entirely. I dried my hands, picked up the phone, and saw his name on the screen. I stood there longer than I should have. Not angry, that's the thing. The anger had burned off years ago and left something more embarrassing underneath. Something that felt a lot like hope, and hope after 4 years and 3 months and 11 days of silence is not a comfortable feeling. It's the thing that gets you. It's the thing you should probably guard against and somehow never do. His message read, "Dad, saw your Alaska trip photos. Glad you're doing well. Heather and I have something exciting we'd like to share with you. We're having dinner Sunday at Fleming's, 7 p.m. Come ready to talk business. This could be good for both of us." I read it twice, then a third time. "No, I missed you. No, I'm sorry it's been so long. No question about the hip or the house sale or any of the years between. Just a dinner invitation and the phrase, 'Come ready to talk business,' sitting there at the end like a price tag hanging off the gift wrapping." I put the phone face down on the counter and went back to the mug I'd already washed. Welcome to Dad's harsh revenge. Make yourself comfortable because this one's going to take you somewhere real. Hit that like button and drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. I promise you'll want to stay for all of it. There are things you need to understand about the 4 years before that text message, because none of this started with a dinner invitation. My son and I had something good once. The kind of relationship between a father and a son that doesn't need much decoration. You're just around each other, you work on things together, you eat bad diner food on Saturday mornings after a side job, and you ride home in a truck that smells like coffee and joint compound, and you don't say a lot because you don't need to. He was a good kid, curious, decent, hardworking when he wanted to be. We had years of that, quiet years, and I didn't appreciate them the way I should have. You never do until they're gone. The marriage to his mother ended when he was 19. We'd been grinding against each other long before that, quietly, the way people who are good at maintaining appearances tend to do. And when we finally stopped pretending it was working, it wasn't dramatic. We split the equity, divided the accounts, went our separate ways as civilly as two people can when there's a kid between them and a lot of unsaid things on both sides. I kept showing up after. I drove 4 hours round trip for his college graduation, lent him money twice, different amounts, never asked for it back. Helped him move 3 different times in 4 years. Took a Saturday off work to help him look at his first truck. The things you do because you're his father, not because you're keeping score. What I missed, what I was too tired and too focused on retirement accounts and keeping the old house standing to notice, was what was happening slowly on the other side. His mother is not a cruel woman. I want to be fair about that. But she was a woman who felt wronged by a marriage that didn't go the way she'd planned, and she spent the better part of a decade making sure our son understood her version of every story with a consistency and a frequency that my version never got. Small things. Gradual revisions. A version of me built carefully over years that I wouldn't recognize if I met him on the street. By the time my son was 25, he'd been handed a father who was withholding, who'd never given enough, who'd only been generous when it was convenient. I didn't find out how thorough a job she'd done until much later. By then, it almost didn't matter. Then he married Heather. I'm going to try to be accurate about this and not just bitter because there's a real difference between the two and I'm old enough to know it. Heather came from a family that measured relationships by what they produced. Not history, not affection, utility. Her father ran multiple LLCs out of a strip mall office in Hilliard and treated every conversation like a negotiation. She was pleasant enough with me at first, remembered my coffee order, sent birthday texts. But I was watching the way you watch a new pressure gauge on a system you haven't tested yet, noting where the needle sits, waiting to see how it moves under load. About a year into their marriage, the pressure shifted. My son showed up less, calls got shorter, then stopped coming from him directly, only from her, relaying information, managing logistics. Then came the afternoon he called and told me, flat and clearly rehearsed, that he needed space from me, that I was unsupportive, that I didn't respect his choices. I asked him to explain what he meant. He said I knew what he meant. I didn't. 4 years, 3 months, and 11 days later, I was standing in my kitchen holding a text message about dinner, and I still didn't fully understand it. But I understood enough. I didn't answer the text right away, sat with it for a full day, which is how I've handled every decision that mattered since I was about 30. Let it settle, walk around it, see if it changes shape before you commit to anything. I went around the block twice, watched a ball game, ate leftover chili, fell asleep in the recliner and woke up at midnight with the TV still going. I kept coming back to a single phrase from his message, good for both of us. Not good for us, not the natural way you phrase it when you want to reconnect with your father after years apart. Good for both of us, like a value proposition, like something someone had helped draft. I decided I would go, but I would go with my eyes open, and I had 4 days. I want to be clear about something. I didn't hire anyone. I didn't set any kind of trap. What I did was exactly what I'd done for 35 years. When a system or a piece of equipment raised a question, I traced it back to the source before I trusted it with anything that mattered. I sat at my kitchen table with a pot of fresh coffee and a legal pad and started with what I knew. Heather's father ran a real estate investment operation. My son had mentioned it once, years ago, the name of it, Beacon Ridge Property Partners. The Ohio Secretary of State's business database pulled it up in about 4 minutes. Beacon Ridge Property Partners, LLC, registered 2021, 3 managing members listed. The registered agent address was a UPS store on Morse Road in Columbus. I wrote that down. I searched each of the 3 partners individually. Heather's father had a verifiable public presence, a real estate license on the Ohio Division of Real Estate's lookup database, a LinkedIn page, a few old local business journal mentions. The second partner had a LinkedIn profile with a professional headshot and a 3-line bio, but no employment history I could verify anywhere else, no business filings beyond this one, no digital footprint older than about 2 years. The third partner had nothing I could find at all. His name on the filing was the entirety of his existence as far as any public record was concerned. I noted all of it. Then I found the Ohio Division of Real Estate complaint records. They're public information. Not many people know to look there, but if you look, they're there. Beacon Ridge had 2 formal complaints filed against it in the preceding 18 months. Both were listed as resolved via withdrawal, meaning the person who filed the complaint pulled it before adjudication. No penalty on record, no public finding of wrongdoing. In my 35 years working industrial jobs and running the occasional side business, a withdrawn complaint usually means one of 3 things. The problem was resolved legitimately, the complainant was persuaded to stay quiet, or the situation got too complicated to pursue without resources nobody had. I've seen all 3. I know which one appears most often when there's a pattern behind it. I kept digging. Found an Ohio Common Pleas Court filing from Franklin County, civil case about 14 months old, 2 plaintiffs, marked settled, terms sealed. The defendant was a separate LLC, same Hilliard address, different name. Heather's father listed as an officer of that entity as well. I printed every page, folded it all into a plain manila envelope, same kind I used for job site quality reports back in the day, and slid it into the inside pocket of my sport coat. Then I drove to Fleming's on Sunday and arrived at 6:50, 10 minutes early, which is how I've shown up to every important appointment in my life. My son was already in the booth when I came in, him and Heather both seated, menus open, looking like a photograph of a successful young couple who had dressed up slightly more carefully than the restaurant technically required. Heather had on a blazer. My son had his hair combed differently than he usually does. He stood when I walked over. We shook hands. After 4 years, we shook hands. I thought about pulling him into a hug. I wanted to, if I'm being fully honest with myself, but his body language was formal and careful, so I matched it. We sat down. "It's really good to see you, Dad," he said. And I believed that part. That's what made the whole evening harder than it needed to be. Underneath the pressed shirt and whatever presentation was coming, I think he genuinely meant it. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. It's good to see you too, son. We talked around the edges for the first 15 minutes. His job, supply chain management, a promotion last spring, Heather's marketing work, the house in New Albany, that particular New Albany where the driveways are freshly sealed and the lawns are kept up like hotel lobbies and the HOA dues are high enough to cover a car payment. They'd bought it 2 years ago, he said, right at the top of the market. I listened and did the quiet arithmetic the way I always do when numbers don't add up. Their combined income was decent, probably good by most measures. New Albany was not a decent income neighborhood. Someone else's money was somewhere in that picture. After the appetizers, Heather folded her hands on the tablecloth and shifted the tone the way a pilot shifts from cruising altitude to approach, smoothly, with clear purpose. We wanted to bring you in on something, Norman, she said. First name, as always, she'd never once called me anything else. Something my father has been building for several years, a private real estate fund, residential acquisitions, short-term holds, some commercial bridge lending. He's brought in a select group of investors, and the returns have been very strong. She slid a single-page summary across the table, printed on heavy stock, clean layout, numbers in a confident font, $200,000 minimum investment, 6-month lockup period, 15% annualized return guaranteed. That word sat there on the page, guaranteed, in a private real estate fund. I looked at it the way you look at a weld that's been ground smooth to hide the flaw underneath. The finish is neat, but you know to look at what it's covering. Walk me through the underlying assets, I said. Her expression didn't change, but something behind it did, a small, almost imperceptible recalibration. The portfolio is primarily residential in the central Ohio corridor. A few commercial bridge positions. My father would love to sit down with you personally and go through the full prospectus. He's very transparent about everything. How many investors are currently in the fund? It's a private group. He keeps it intentionally exclusive. And the 2 complaints filed with the Division of Real Estate in the past 18 months, I said. The same tone I'd use presenting any other piece of information in a job site meeting. Level, no heat behind it. Just the information itself. Are those fully resolved or still pending? The air at the table changed. Not dramatically, not loudly. The quiet shift you feel when someone says the thing that wasn't supposed to enter the room. Heather recovered quickly. I'll give her that. There was a misunderstanding with a former investor. It was addressed. Both of them? My son was looking at the tablecloth. I turned to face him directly. Not to her, to him. I'd like 5 minutes with you. Just the 2 of us. Is that something you'd give me? He started to answer. Heather's hand came to rest on his forearm, light, practiced, the kind of touch that's so routine it looks like affection and functions like a signal. We're a team, she said. Whatever you'd like to say to him, you can say here. I held my son's eyes. He didn't contradict her. He looked back at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Part resignation, part something that might have been shame, and underneath it all, something that might have been an apology he didn't know how to make out loud. I reached into my sport coat and set the manila envelope on the table. Didn't slide it across dramatically. Just placed it there, in the space between the wine glasses and the untouched bread basket. Before either of you invests a single dollar into this fund, I said, keeping my voice at the same level and pace I used when delivering bad news on a job site, you need to read what's in that envelope. The registered address for the LLC is a commercial mailbox. 2 of the 3 listed partners have no verifiable public business history anywhere outside this one filing. There's a sealed civil settlement from a connected LLC 14 months ago. 2 complaints to the Division of Real Estate, both withdrawn before adjudication. That's a pattern, not a coincidence. I looked at my son one more time. I came here tonight because you're my son, not because of this dinner and not because of this proposal. I came because whatever has happened between us, I am not going to sit across from you and watch you walk towards something that could take everything you have without saying a word. That's not who I am. It was never who I was. I stood, picked up the check and left $220 on the table, covered dinner and then some. The envelope is yours, I said. Get a real estate attorney to look at it before you do anything this week, not next week. I buttoned my jacket and walked out through the dining room, past the hostess stand, through the front door and into the parking lot air, which was cold and clear after the warmth inside. I sat in my truck for a long moment before I started the engine, hands on the wheel, listening to nothing. The restaurant lights made shapes on the wet asphalt. I didn't feel righteous. There's nothing satisfying about handing your son a folder full of evidence that the people around him might not deserve his trust. There's nothing clean about walking away from a restaurant after 4 years of silence with the conversation still unresolved on the table behind you. I drove home on the highway with the radio off and the window cracked and told myself what I've told myself through every hard thing in the last 3 decades. You did what you could do. Now let it land where it lands. The next 5 days had a particular quality to them, the kind of suspended quiet that follows a decision you can't walk back. I took my neighbor's dog on her morning walks because she'd broken her wrist and couldn't manage the leash. Reorganized the garage. Called my brother in Dayton and talked about the Reds for 45 minutes, which is another way of saying we talked about disappointment, in a language we've both been fluent in for 50 years. Thursday morning, I was on my second cup of coffee when I opened the Columbus Dispatch online. The headline was in the middle of the business section, not the front page. Nobody's fraud case ever is, until it gets big enough to become a criminal matter. Ohio Real Estate License Board suspends Hilliard Investment Firm amid multi-investor complaint review. The article named a subsidiary LLC, not Beacon Ridge directly, but registered to the same Hilliard address. Heather's father appeared in the fourth paragraph. The division had received 6 investor complaints over an 8-month period. A civil suit from 2 Franklin County investors seeking recovery of $400,000 in combined losses had been filed the prior week. The report noted coordination between the division's enforcement office and the Ohio Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. I read the article twice and set my coffee down. I hadn't made a call. I hadn't filed anything. All I'd done was print public records and put them in an envelope. Whatever was closing in on Beacon Ridge Property Partners had been building long before I walked into that restaurant Sunday night. I was not the cause of any of it. I was barely a footnote, but my son had $40,000 in that fund. He told me that himself when he finally called. He called Saturday afternoon. I was on the back porch with a library book I'd been trying to finish for 3 weeks and making no progress on. His voice was completely different from the dinner voice. The dinner voice had been pressed and positioned, everything in its right place. This voice was just him, the way he used to sound as a teenager when something had gone wrong and he was figuring out how to tell me before it got any worse. Dad. I'm here, son. Long silence, I didn't fill it. Heather's dad lost his license. They're under investigation. We put $40,000 in last month. His voice broke on that number. Not badly, he held it together, but enough. I didn't read the envelope. I know. I should have read it. I didn't respond to that. He wasn't really asking me anything. We talked for an hour. I gave him the practical steps first, because that's where I always start when someone is in trouble. You stabilize before you process. Contact the Ohio AG's Consumer Protection Office. File a complaint with the Division of Real Estate. Hire a civil attorney who specializes in investment fraud, not a general practice lawyer, a specific one. Gather every document in the house. Wire confirmation, statements, emails, text messages. Do it this week. Then there was a stretch of quiet, and he broke it. I'm sorry about your surgery, he said. When you had your hip done, I should have called. I let that sit for a moment before I answered. Because those words, after 4 years, are not nothing. They are also not everything. You learn to hold both of those truths at the same time when you've been around long enough to know the difference. Yeah, I said. You should have. There are things Mom told me that I think I believed things about you that weren't accurate. He stopped. Started again. Heather made it easier to stay away than to come back. I let her. I know you did. Can I come by? Sunday, I said. Come Sunday. But understand something first. When you come here, it's as my son, not as someone who needs me to fix what happened. I can't recover the $40,000. I can't undo 4 years. What I can do is be your father from this point forward, and that only works if you're willing to be honest with me about everything, including some of what your mother told you over the years that wasn't true. That's a hard conversation, and I'm not going to skip it. Long pause. Okay, he said, Sunday. He came alone. I had coffee ready. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat through 4 winters reading secondhand updates about his life, and we talked for close to 3 hours. Some of it was difficult to hear without flinching. He told me specific things his mother had told him I'd said, words I never said. He described coaching sessions Heather had run before conversations he'd had with me, the ones I'd felt something off about but couldn't locate. He told me how the circle around him had been drawn, gradually and efficiently, until I was outside it and didn't fully realize it. I listened to most of it without interrupting, because he needed to get it out more than I needed to correct the record in real time. When the room went quiet between us, I told him clearly what I could offer and what I couldn't. I'd cover 2 months of their basic living expenses, groceries, utilities, the minimum payments that keep the lights on, while they dealt with the legal fallout. Not alone, just support, because he was my son, and that word still meant something to me. I was not going to subsidize the New Albany mortgage on a house bought at the top of a market they couldn't carry on their own. I was not going to be a source of ongoing rescue. I was his father. That was both more and less than what he'd been treating me as, and he needed to understand the difference. He didn't argue. He nodded. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time, and had finally set it down long enough to feel how sore his arms were. Before he left, he stopped in the doorway and looked at me in a way he hadn't since he was young. Not calculating, not careful, just looking. "Are we okay?" he asked. I thought about it for a real second before answering. "We're not where we were," I said. "We're not supposed to be, not after all this. But we're talking, and we're in the same room, and that's more than we had a week ago. We build from here." He nodded, walked out to his car, stopped halfway down the driveway, and turned around. "I should have read the envelope, Dad." "You should have called when I had my surgery," I said. "But here we are." He got in his car and backed out slowly. I stood at the front door until the sound of his engine faded down the street, the way you stand in a doorway when you're not sure yet whether something is beginning or just pausing in the middle of something longer. I don't know which one it is. Some things need more than one honest Sunday afternoon to become clear. I went back inside, poured the last of the coffee, sat down in my chair by the window. I didn't feel like I'd won anything, and I want to say that plainly. There is no version of watching your son lose $40,000 to a fraud scheme that registers as a victory. There's no triumph in 4 years of silence, followed by a relationship that has to be rebuilt stud by stud, like a house that stood empty too long and let the damp in. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired, and a little lighter than I had in a long time, and cautious about what I expected to walk through that door going forward. The door stays open. That part isn't conditional. He's my son, and that doesn't stop being true because he made it complicated for a while. But some things don't get skipped. Some things have to be walked through, one honest conversation at a time, at a pace that's real, without anyone writing the script. That's where we are. That's where we start. If you've been listening, I'd like to know what you think. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. Hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the time. There's more where this came from, and you won't want to miss what comes next.